What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to part 4 of my Hakes coverage. And for this last video, I'm going to cover some of the CGC graded comic books that were for sale in the last Hakes auction. This was probably honestly where I was most interested. I had a watch list going, so I'm going to be only showing the books that I had on my watch list and I was kind of taking a look at, either to cover for this video or because I was considering myself. I didn't bid on anything, but I just thought there were some cool books that were worth taking a look at, Silver Age all the way through to modern stuff. And the prices were not exactly deals. I mean, I think for the most part, most of these came in at market value or above. And so I stayed away. The prices were well above my comfort level on most of these books by the morning of the end of the auction. So I knew that by the end of the auction that night, it was going to be too much money with future bids kind of coming in last minute. But I did want to kind of cover them. I thought they were kind of interesting. So let's take a look. The first one, I really was looking at this one, Batman 189. This is the first Silver Age appearance of the Scarecrow. It's got a great cover on it there, and it was white pages, which is tough to find for a 1967 book graded CGC 8.0. Just an awesome looking cover. I'd love to pick up one of these at some point next year, kind of in this grade range. And the value code was 1,000 to 2,000. It ended after the buyer's premium of 18%. All of the prices I'm going to quote as usual are after the buyer's premium. The winning bid was about 1080, which is a little bit below fair market value. This was probably one of the better deals and was very tempting. But just the timing was not right. I've got some other books I want to knock out first before I start digging in seriously to some of the Silver Age keys that are kind of on my want list. But still, I thought that was a really good deal, especially for white pages. It's tough to find this one. Usually they're off-white to white at best, usually off-white. To get it for white pages, 8.0 grade for 1080, which is at the low end of the value code. I thought that was a pretty good deal. Next up is another one I really want to get in some grade. I don't know what grade it's going to be, but it continues to go up in price despite the general market downturn for comics. It's just always going up, as I've talked about in other videos, and that's Batman 227. This is just a beautiful book, Neil Adams cover, one of my favorite books from the 1970s, and you can see the cover there. It's just beautiful. It did have an overwrap on the left-hand side. 7.0 off-white to white pages. The value code was 700 to 1,000, which was right in line with fair market value. It sold at 782, so very nice. I'm hoping I can pick one of these up more like in the 8.5 to 9.0 range. Obviously, I'm going to have to pay quite a bit more than $782, but I thought that in terms of grade, that's probably about as low as I'm willing to go on it. And that was worth every penny for what it was. Next up is another one I'd really like to get, and that's Batman 232. This is just a classic Neil Adams cover with the first appearance of Ra's al Ghul, and it's got the origin of Batman and Robin retold as well. Just an absolute classic. And this one was graded at CGC 9.4, which is probably about as high as I'm willing to go in terms of the grade. A CGC 9.8 is, over $10,000. I'm not paying that. But this is a beauty, and I was definitely considering that one. That one sold at $14.48, which is right in line with market, probably even a couple $100 below fair market value. So just an absolutely beautiful book. But I'm hoping to get white pages for whenever I go after one. Next up is a CGC 9.8 for Batman 357. This is the first appearance of Killer Croc, as well as the first appearance of Jason Todd, who is obviously the second Robin. And a pretty great cover. White pages, direct edition, and the value code was 700 to 1,000, which I knew was too high in the current market environment. They've been selling on eBay for kind of 600-ish. This one sold for 520, so even that one, maybe after accounting for shipping, it's probably about right. $520 for that one, Batman 357. Next up was Saga of Swamp Thing number 37. This is the first full appearance of John Constantine. Pretty classic cover. I'd love to pick up that one at some point, but that one was a CGC 9.8 with white pages, and it sold for $13.21. So that book's come back down to earth a little bit. It was kind of hovering towards the upper end of that value code for the longest time, 1,800 to 2,000. I thought that was a pretty good deal there. Next up is, let's see, Detective Comics number 298. This is the first Silver Age appearance of Clayface, a pretty famous villain from the Batman universe. And this one was graded CGC 6.5 with off-white pages. Pretty awesome book there from 1961. That one sold for $7.43. I thought that was a very fair price for what it was. And, you know, again, I'm just trying to cover some books that are maybe some Silver Age 9.8s for those of you who out there that collect those. Next up, here's a beauty. It was a little bit too low grade for what I like, but it's a very expensive book, and that's Amazing Spider-Man number 3 from 1963. This is the origin and first appearance of Dr. Octopus. It did unfortunately have some writing on the front of the cover, so I think if I ever go after one of these, I'm probably going to try to pick one without that writing on the cover. But pretty infamous or famous, sought-after book. The value code was $2,000 to $5,000. It came in at $1,674, probably because of the writing on the cover there. But even in low grade, these go for very, very big numbers, just given what it is. First appearance of Dr. Octopus, pretty awesome cover, and $1,674 took that home in a CGC 3.0. Next up was Amazing Spider-Man number 50. This is the first appearance of Kingpin and the origin of Spider-Man retold. This is about the right grade I'd like to get this book in, and it was off-white to white pages, which I'd be fine with for what this book is. And I thought this price was very fair. Some of the books at Comic Link, I couldn't tell if it was reflections from the person taking the photograph or if it was scuffs on the CGC slab. You can see some kind of discoloration right here. Again, it could be just reflections there. But, you know, this is a beautiful book, very sought after. John Romita cover. I'd love to get that one in about this grade. And it sold for $2,076, so towards the lower end of the value code of $2,000 to $5,000. Next up is a book I do have on the way. I did pick this book up on Instagram, and I paid for about the same price as what this one went for. This is the newsstand edition of Amazing Spider-Man number 252 in an older case. I did not have newsstand written here. It also did appear to have Newton rings, really bad Newton rings. I haven't gotten mine in hand yet, so we'll see what mine got. But I have this exact same book, newsstand edition, 9.8 white pages, and I bought mine on Instagram from Elite Comics 11, which is a pretty famous comic book dealer. This one, the value code was $1,000 to $2,000. It sold for $14.42. We just documented over at Comic Link last month. They've been selling in that $1,500 range, so that was kind of right in line with market. They seem to be kind of hovering at that price point. So value code $1,000 to $2,000. It sold for $14.42 after the buyer's premium. Next up is Amazing Spider-Man number 300 in a direct edition. This is the first appearance of Venom. Pretty amazing cover from Todd McFarlane. White pages, 9.8 grade, and it sold for $28.84, which I thought was a pretty good deal. And you know, this was even lower than where this one sold last month on Comic Link. The last one on Comic Link sold for $3,050. This one sold for $28.84 before the shipping costs. So I thought that was a really good deal there. Next up is one I do have in my collection, and that's the direct edition of Incredible Hulk number 340. This is obviously the second fight between Hulk and Wolverine. Todd McFarlane cover, and just a beauty, 9.8 with white pages. That one sold for $9.54 after the buyer's premium. I thought that was a really good deal. And this is even lower than where this one had been selling last month on Comic Link, around $1,100. So that was probably the lowest price I've seen in a while for a 9.8 of Incredible Hulk number 340. Next up was the direct edition of New Mutants 98, obviously the first appearance of Deadpool. Direct edition, that one sold for $11.09. That's kind of right in line, if not even slightly below where they sold last month on Comic Link. $11.50 to kind of $12.50 has been about the going rate, so that's kind of right in line with market as well. No big surprise there. Next up is another one I'd love to have, and this one was well down. I thought this was a great deal. This is Star Wars number 2, the first full appearance of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Han Solo. I think also Chewbacca in comics. So this is part 2, obviously, of the adaptation of A New Hope, and 9.8 with white pages. This one had been going kind of $2,500 to $2,800 for the longest time. This one sold for $19.63. That's definitely the lowest I've seen in a long time, and a pretty good time to pick that book up in that price point, if you ask me. I would love to get it for that price. That's a really good value for what it is. Also, Star Wars number... let's see, Star Wars number 3 in a 9.8. Star Wars number 3, 4, and 5, and 6, they tend to not be that expensive just because there's no big first appearances. Those first 6 books are the first or the movie adaptation in comic book form. And 3 through 6 are relatively inexpensive versus 1 and 2. Obviously, number 1 is the most expensive, but this one sold for $4.41 in a 9.8. And they also had Star Wars number 4 in a 9.8 grade, white pages. This is probably my favorite cover of the entire adaptation run. It's just an awesome cover. It's showing Darth Vader kind of with his hands raised and attacking Obi-Wan, Luke, and Leia. You know, it's not an expensive book, but it's definitely one of the coolest covers out there. And that one sold for $4.41, another good value there. Next up, I thought this was an interesting sale because the book was not perfect. It was a 9.8 with white pages for Star Wars number 42, the newsstand edition. But if you look, you know, at first glance, it looks perfect, right? It looks absolutely perfect. But look what happens when you zoom in on it. When you zoom in on it, on the Star Wars logo, there's this ugly, ugly scratch that goes from the Marvel Comics Group logo all the way through to Boba Fett's head, all the way down here. So again, it's probably a printer error of some sort. It's not like on the case or anything like that. But, you know, to me, that's enough to where I wouldn't pay fair market value for it. And this book ended up selling for fair market value of $14.93 was the winning bid on that one. I wouldn't pay that price for how this book presents. So you really got to zoom in on these photos. Yeah, a near perfect copy of a newsstand edition of Star Wars 42. Yes, I'd pay $1,500 all day long. That's a really good value. And about where they sell for on eBay prior to paying sales taxes. But I wouldn't pay $1,500 for this book, for this particular book, just given that big ugly streak that went all the way down the front of the cover. So a little surprised it sold that high. I was thinking kind of closer to what a usual direct edition sells for in a 9.8 for Star Wars 42, about $1,100. I just think it was worth a discount, just given the defects to the cover of that book. Next up was another one I was really considering, and that's the newsstand edition of Wolverine Limited Series number 1, a pretty iconic cover from Frank Miller. It did have a little bit of an overwrap on the left-hand side, so I kind of stayed away from it, but it was, you know, otherwise a pretty clean-looking copy, and it sold for $10.72. We just documented one, or maybe we didn't, I can't remember, but I saw one that did sell on eBay recently in an auction for $1,300 on eBay. So you think probably $1,500 after shipping and paying sales taxes, but this one sold for $10.72 after the buyer's premium. So I thought that was a particularly good deal. It probably was down a little bit because of the overwrap on the left-hand side. Next up, we had a pretty desirable book, and that's Star Wars The Clone Wars number 1, but this was the variant edition, one of only 1,000 copies printed. It was a CGC 9.8 with white pages, the first appearance of Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex in comics. A pretty awesome book, and this book has taken a free fall in price. This one was going for like $6,000 6 to 9 months ago. The value code on it I knew was too high. It came in at $5,000 to $10,000. The winning bid was $41.23. I see these on Instagram all the time being listed for $3,500 to $3,800, and they can't give them away. Nobody's claiming them. So this was even a relative overpay versus where they're being offered for sale on Instagram with no fees. So not a number I'd pay at $41.23 right now, because this book continues to drop like a rock. I think if you wait 6 to 9 months, this book will be $3,000, if not maybe even below that. But $3,000 to me is kind of the target price to aim for the special edition version of Clone Wars number 1. And then finally, I had Ultimate Fallout 4, the standard cover A, the first print. This is the first appearance of Miles Morales in comics. And as I talked about, I was kind of hoping this book would get down to about $1,400, and that's about where they've been selling on Comic Link. This one sold even lower, and it was a very clean copy. I didn't see any issues with it. It sold for $13.30. So this book continues to go down. Even on Instagram, you can pick it up for about $1,300. So, you know, a lot of people are thinking this book is going to drop even further. So I hope it does, because I'd love to pick it up in that $1,000 range if it gets that low. But just wanted to cover that one as well. Anyway, lots of really interesting items. This by no means covers everything that was for sale at auction on Hakes in this last lot, but I wanted to cover the books that I was at least watching that I have on my radar that I would like to add. And for the most part, the prices were kind of at fair market value with a few exceptions here and there. Thanks as always for watching my Hakes coverage. I hope you enjoyed these 4 videos, and I'll be back soon.